It's August 25th, 2021, and we're talking to Inero and Ablazeolive of the Golden Guardians about looking back on their 2021 season, their expectations for the LCS Finals and the World Championships, and what they're doing to prepare for 2022. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and our first guest today is Nick, the head coach of Golden Guardians, Nick Inero Smith. How's it going for you, Nick?
Pretty good, man. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing well, and we're also joined by your team's starting mid laner, Nick Ablazeolive, Abbot. Glad to have you here. What have you been up to lately?
I've just been relaxing, taking it easy for past few weeks or past week basically.
Yeah, have you left LA, gone back home already?
Yeah, I'm back home. Took a fast flight.
Yeah.
I didn't get to go back between splits, so.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm sure with some of the COVID restrictions and that, a little bit harder to take those kind of like mid-season vacations or so on and reset your head. Were you able to do that in past years?
Yeah, except for the last 2 years, right? Because it was both COVID.
Yeah.
But all the other years, I always went back.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. I'm sure that applied to a lot of people. Did it kind of throw off your rhythm at all? Did you notice that the difference of not being able to do that?
Yeah, it did feel like there's some places here in Canada that I like because I have like a issue with food, and there's a lot of food places I like here, so it kind of sucked not being able to go there, but you deal with it. It's not the end of the world.
Well, you may have seen the news today, speaking of Canada and food, that Tencent and Tim Hortons have launched their joint gaming/coffee shop locations in China. So, maybe in the future that'll trickle back to us in Canada as well. But we'll have to find out. Well, why don't we get into the show here? We've got you both. I'm not going to refer to you both as Nick throughout the show. I think that's going to be a little too challenging for me to keep straight. So, we'll go with the nicknames. I'm sure inside the house, you guys, do you have any strategy for dealing with that inside the house or in the office rather?
No, we pretended to try to figure it out, and then we gave up immediately.
Just hey you a lot of the time.
Saying Inero or saying Olive just feels weird. Everyone else gets called their normal name, and then it's just like, hey, Olive. Yeah. It's just a little awkward.
Yeah, it's really strange because usually you tell people to call people by their first name. So everyone already called Nick, and then I joined the team, and then you're supposed to call your teammates by their first name. So it's like, yeah.
Well, life is full of challenges, and being a professional esports athlete also full of challenges, or coach. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about it? I'd love to spend some time talking about looking back at the year that's happened, also looking ahead to what's coming up next. Obviously we still have the LCS Finals coming up. We've got Worlds, we've got the whole off season and everything that's going to be anticipated in that. So I think we'll have a lot to cover through that whole sequence, but let's start by looking back a little bit about at 2021. Now that you guys have had a little bit of time, there's been a little bit of this distance since you were eliminated from the playoffs, and you've had hopefully some time to reflect, and I don't know if you do exit interviews or things like that, but I'd love to hear, maybe starting from you, Inero, what are some of the main things that you're kind of taking away from the LCS season that you guys just had?
For me, it's just a lot of stuff that we did good and bad in practice. But in a development year, it's a pretty good time to experiment with things and try that out. So that's really like the biggest takeaway for me, is just all kind of like how the system worked and operated between the coaches and the players.
Well, and you guys had a lot of things you tried out with coaching this year, right? Like I can't remember exactly what your staff was in 2020, but I know it was quite big this year with a lot of different people taking on different roles and things, right?
Yeah, so in 2020, we had like time for individual reviews, and then we had time for team review. But moving into the split, like we hired out coaches for pretty much every single role. So that way they could kind of like monitor, just a positional coach, kind of trying to model it a little bit after traditional sports in that way. I just wanted to test to see how beneficial we felt that was.
Yeah.
It was pretty nice. It's good to have like different perspective from the roles, because I think whenever it's just everyone has their bias, you know, like every coach
Sure.
has the role of like they play, and they're gonna be like slightly biased towards that. Like I'm for sure biased towards like how bot lane plays, and I know that's been like probably apparent in the teams I've worked on generally too, that that's kind of something that'll happen. Um, so it's nice to have that balance with things, different perspectives, pretty helpful.
So I guess you had the coaching approaches that you tried, different roles and different methods of that. What are some of the things that you, in terms of like maybe developing the players, say, what are some of the things that you learned maybe that worked or didn't work?
Um, so I think probably the easier one to note was just certain things like team dynamic. Can't go too much like into that for perspective wise, but just recognizing like how certain things mix to help out different types of personalities learn in the game and also succeed. That's always like a weird balance, and you never like truly know what someone's like coming in or what's going to be like best for them. It's kind of a little bit of a guessing game, but it gets better with time as you run into different people. Um,
Sure.
so that helped. It's always good.
Yeah, I can imagine. All the personalities. It's the stuff that when you're, like an armchair analyst or whatever, and you see why don't they get this player to play that way, or just tell them to play this strategy or whatever, and it's all that
Yeah.
soft kind of the soft stuff in the background of how the personalities work, and can this player just flip a switch into playing that way? Will they be able to explain it to their teammates properly? All that kind of stuff, right?
hmm Pretty much.
Uh, and Ablazeolive, from your perspective, coming into the LCS was a big change for you, right? As opposed to playing in academy. What were some of the things that were most kind of different about this year compared to your past experience?
Um, I think probably the most different is just how much more improvement people get. I feel like throughout the entire year, there's like a very significant level up, which I anticipated naturally, but I think I underestimated just how strong it was. I feel like if you look at the teams in lock-in or even like spring and then compare them to how they are ending up in summer, like it really feels night and day. And that's not just in terms of team play, that's just in terms of like every aspect of the game, like laning. I'm sure some of that's rust, obviously, but I was definitely like surprised because in academy at least, there's usually like three teams that have like pretty solid rosters with like ex LCS players or like people that are like people that are likely to go to LCS next year. Um, and then almost every other roster is just like very developmental, so the level of play is like a lot lower on average. So your practice is a lot lower, so the level of improvement you get is just not as high. So I was definitely underestimating just how much all the teams would get better individually and as a team.
That's really interesting to think, and I'm sure Inero as someone who coaches, and I know you do have some level of input into what's going on in the academy side, right? Is that something that you've noticed from the coaching perspective? Is this the difference in the rate of improvement at those different levels?
Between like other LCS and academy teams,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely there's still going to be like some teams even in LCS that feels like don't move up too much. Like it kind of stays like relatively the same. But I think that's going to be the case in competition everywhere. It just happens.
Yeah.
But I definitely say in academy, yeah, it's usually like that. I know with like the short stint that I had in academy too, it was like pretty clear there was like Nick was saying, there's like two or three teams that were doing really well, and you could tell we're like growing, and then the rest was just kind of like a slow build.
How much do
Stagnant.
you think, and I don't know how much this is, you could answer this from experience versus just speculating, but how much do you think that's related to, who the players are there in academy, and just the fact that, academy has differences from LCS and how important the competition is and stuff like that, compared to the resources being invested into the academy teams, with you assume that the best coaches on average are going to be brought up into the LCS level if they, that they've kind of earned their way there. How much do you think that plays into it?
I definitely think resources has a lot to do with it. Um, I mean, yeah, a lot of the guys I know in academy too, or at least from what I remember, even on like the coaching end of stuff, like they're also developing. Like they're trying to get better at it too. Like we're still like pretty young on everything, so a lot of the coaches there, like I said, from what I remember, people that are around like the same age as the players too.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. And I know when I was at that point, like comparing myself back, I don't know, when I was like 23 to now, like I didn't know anything. I didn't know a thing at all really in comparison. So it takes a while to build up to that and just like how to manage those groups. But I think if you can't manage it super well and you're still learning, it's hard to kind of keep everyone on pace and improving constantly.
Do you think that the level of coaching on average in Academy has improved over the past few years, going back to, when they created Academy in 2018? Because like this is one of the things that I was personally most excited about with the creation of Academy is here's an opportunity where they have to have coaches in Academy. So there's going to just by the fact that these coaches even exist or like the roles for them exist, in theory, more coaches will get experience and get to improve. So I'm curious from the perspective as a coach and as a player, for each of you, whether you think that improvement has actually been visibly kicking in.
I have no idea, honestly. I don't know what other teams like really do. Like I'm not there, so it's really hard to judge.
Sure.
Coaching on it, and I'm pretty certain. It's so hard to remember like the names that were working in like what splits, but it feels like the people that are doing a really good job tend to move out of it fast.
Yeah.
And move up to like something else. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like I think Artemis might be an example who was in Academy with Clutch, right? And then he got moved up with EG or something like that, if I'm remembering that one right. I'm sure
LC moved to a different role.
Yeah.
I guess it's not down. It's just like a different scene. It's like collegiate stuff instead.
Yeah, Kelsey works on player development,
like
not
bigger.
necessarily coaching a team.
Yeah.
I think most of the time, like you said, all the coaches that have like shown clearly that they know their stuff and they can develop a team, like get moved up pretty quickly, which if you think about it, they wouldn't have had that opportunity otherwise, most likely, right?
Yeah.
So I think it definitely has improved the coaching skill level. Like the coaches have definitely improved. The coaching has improved definitely since Academy has been introduced. Just personally, I feel like it's very likely that even the coaches that aren't necessarily getting moved up quickly are also like improving better as well. I also don't really remember all the coaches, but there are definitely a few coaches that I can think of off the top of my head that have done really well, in my opinion, that may not have had an opportunity otherwise, right? Yeah. And I think that's like the really big thing.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, now we're seeing a little bit more this year. We're seeing also the players get a little more opportunity in some cases. And we can talk about that in a bit. But, before we move into some of the, the rookie experiences and things like that, just to recap a little bit more about 2021, Olive, from your perspective, how much would you consider 2021 a success for you and your team?
To be honest, that's like a tough question because I have like really high expectations.
I'm all about the tough questions.
I know, hard hitting, makes you think. I have really high expectations for myself. Like nobody's gonna have higher expectations of my own play and my team's play than I will.
Sure.
So, from my perspective, I wouldn't say it's like a success this year. I wouldn't say it's a failure either. I think it's definitely in the middle ground somewhere. I think we definitely improved a lot in summer, and that was shown with like how we managed to like sneak into playoffs at the very end. Mm-hmm. I think spring we didn't do like that good of a job at improving, and that's like, that's on me, that's on everybody. I think it's just, it really depends on what your end goal is, right? And my end goal isn't to just be like content with like getting like 7th, 6th, 5th. Like it's to get first, it's to go to Worlds. It's to win Worlds, right? So for me, like a success would be like a very clear indicator that like, okay, just one more split and then it's like, that's going to be it. We just need one more split and we're definitely going to win. And I think from my perspective, like this year that's what it's going to be. Like, it's not very clear to me that next year is just going to be Golden Guardians is getting first. So I definitely could have done a lot of things better, and I'll just have to take that into next year and try to do that.
Sure. Yeah, and definitely like defining success is a big part of this, right? Like what were your goals in hindsight? What were you trying to achieve, and then how close to that did you get? So, I mean, Inero, from your perspective, how clearly do you lay out goals like that for what you would define as success, and how close do you feel you got to them this year?
Well, obviously, like I have goals laid out from the org side, like to me, and then obviously we kind of lay those out to the players too. Um,
It seems
for the
obvious, but
different pitching.
I know of teams that don't lay out specific defined goals. So
Yeah, it's definitely like different pitching. Like I know coming into spring, it was pretty clear. Like there weren't expectations. Like it was laid out very, very clearly. Like there's no expectation that you guys are like winning the split. Obviously, if we do, like, sick, but it really shouldn't be happening. It'd be pretty embarrassing for everyone else if we were. It was really just improvement focused and figuring out like where we can land with these guys and like what changes like can be made or should be made and what improvements can be made on how we're like practicing together with this group and individually. Obviously we found that like it wasn't working with what we were doing, like different parts of the process and just like the group that we had wasn't really conducive to success. So like we laid that out to the team like ahead of time so that way they knew like spring regardless wasn't going to be something where like, oh, you're going to get benched if you're just playing poorly, as long as you're still making like different strides on your game. But obviously like that changes for summer because we don't want to spend the whole year just kind of burning time. But yeah, after that, we'll definitely lay out different goals for practice, not necessarily like, oh, we need to be like this specific place in the ranking. We never came in like, oh, we got to be like a sixth place team. Like this is what we need to be. It was just more so focused on like we need to improve on these things and we need to see strides in like this part of your gameplay. And then the coaches take that for their individual review too, and they'll have like individual goals for like each specific player to like make sure they're keeping up to reach that point. So it's all kind of like a system going down from the org to me to the coaches to the players.
yeah, that makes sense. So that kind of switch between spring and summer, when obviously you guys made the roster change, you kind of doubled down and said, okay, now here's the period where we have to care, to some extent more about winning. What were the big differences you made, aside from that roster move, where Niles was sent down to academy and you brought in Solo? Aside from that direct visible change, what kind of other adjustments did you guys make?
We just talked a little bit about how we were doing like review together as coaches. Because it was our first time doing it with that big of a group, and at first it's kind of like a too many cooks thing. Like there's too much going on and trying to manage that. Kind of like defined the time and roles a bit better together to make sure that was an easier process that felt streamlined. Which like by the end of it, it felt like really natural. I didn't ever really feel like there was an issue. Like the only issue I'd say is just like a time constraint kind of thing, like trying to keep within the same times for other teams. Because we pushed an off season like, hey, we should really have review limited to like a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Because
you don't want to be sitting 25 minutes like, between each scrim, right?
Oh, that's a good number. That's actually the number we landed on, Tim. 25. No, it used to be like teams would go like 45 minute plus reviews, and you're just sitting there like,
that's terrible.
All right, your review's going a little longer than the game, boys. Like it needs to chill. Obviously, we hated that because we never went to like that extent, really. So just like condensing both individual and team review into that while still remaining productive, it's still like a task to figure out. Because I never want to over-index on one side over the other because there's a lot to do.
Yeah, definitely. But of course, the roster change is the part that the fans get to see most clearly, and there was the further change with Licorice being bought out from FlyQuest and brought in. Olive, from your perspective, what was, and I'm sure you've discussed this in other contexts, but what was the biggest thing that changed with Licorice coming onto the team?
I think the biggest thing is kind of like a unique thing about Licorice that I've never had in a top laner before. Most of the time, top laners are like lone wolves, and they're kind of their own person, and like since they're like so isolated a lot of the time in game, that the rest of the 4 players will all like be really on the same page about something, or like really understand a certain macro play well, or etc. And that's very common. But I think with Licorice, like he is not like that, which is very good. That was like the biggest thing that I didn't even realize until like at the very end, that he really felt like it was an entire 5 rather than 4+1. So I think that was like the biggest thing, because it made like there's a lot of disconnect that can happen when you have that sort of dynamic within the team.
Yeah.
But I think Eric made it very simple, because he was really willing to learn and like adapt to like what we were comfortable to. You know, as a new player, it can be really tough, like just like joining the team and like figuring out everything that we do and all the things that we prioritize. So I think like he did a really good job at adapting to what we were good at, and you know, providing his insight on what he thought was good based on his past experience on FlyQuest, and just integrating himself in the team. I think he did a really good job.
He also made the team a little bit more Canadian, right?
Yeah, that's always good.
And Australian, funny enough. He's got a Australian passport. Didn't even
Does
know
he?
that before we got him, but that adds to the bias.
So he has dual citizenship?
Yeah, apparently he does.
Cool. I didn't know that. Well, all kinds of people too. I mean, unfortunately, that doesn't help him with the residency stuff the way it helped, you know, Pretty, for example, getting the whole Australian, that people remember back, you know, being able to not be an import anymore. And in the end, that one didn't end up changing anything yet. But that's a neat little fun fact. Well, yeah, I mean, I think people could see from the outside that there was improvement right from the start of summer, and then, you know, that much more with Licorice coming in, and that's something that's going to be exciting as a thread carrying the next year, to see what happens with the roster and how that all gets built out. But before we kind of switch to looking forward a little bit more, you know, I would like to talk a little bit about the kind of the Rookie of the Year stuff. And so in the voting, all of you ended up second Rookie of the Year. I don't know if you read through any of the individual ballots. Did you just like blank out of that?
Rookie of the Year? I mean, I glanced it and then saw that like 90% was Danny first, and then me second, and then the other 10% was me first, Danny second. So I was like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, but I was one of the people who put you first. I want you to know that on the record.
Thank you.
For the reasoning that, you know, largely you played the full year, plus, you know, I think it's easier to be very impressive when on a team that is winning more, right? So, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of that process of, you know, being considered for an award like that, the way people go about selecting it, and kind of, you know, how much does that affect you? Is it something that's in your mind while you're playing it all, or is it just that's all just noise that you've learned to tune out?
No, it doesn't really come into play like in the game. I think these like awards are more for like after the fact, like in, you know, in 10 years, I'm going to be like, man, I really wish I got that award. But right now, it doesn't really bother me. It was like, there's always like that hope that you're going to get it. You know, even like before the year started, it's like, okay, this is my rookie year. I hope I get rookie this way, right?
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't really matter. The same way that you hope, okay, I hope I get MVP too. It's like, okay. But for me, like, okay, I didn't really think that it was going to happen basically after the way the first split started. I didn't really think about it at all. And then when it started being brought up later in the year, you know, it started creeping back up like, hey, what if you actually get it? That'd be kind of cool. But I got cold splash of water when, you know, I was talking to Parth from TSM. We had dinner and he was explaining that, you know, something that everyone knows, which is like, it's a popularity contest.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to be the most popular, and that, you know, Peter Dunn has been talking up Danny like the entire split. And I was like, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And
like,
he's on a winning team, and
I'll tweet more.
And I was like, okay, like, no, I mean, like, you know, there's not really anything you can do. And I was like, yeah, okay, I know I'm not gonna get it now. Like that made sense to me. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where obviously each team is going to try to hype their own player, right? Because it's good for their team, it's good for their player. And you know, if you're Danny and you hear your coach out there publicly, you know, praising you a lot, that's probably very good for you as a team, right? but it is one where I think it is, depending on which group of voters you're talking about, they definitely get swayed more or less by what they hear, or like on the broadcast. If the broadcast is constantly saying, "Oh, look what Danny did," and praising that, and talking less about, what your team was doing or what you were doing within that team, it shapes a lot of things, especially from the media side of the vote, I would say. But also the casters, right? So
yeah, for sure. I think also the perception of like skill isn't like very well translated in like this contest. Like the best, like the most skillful plays usually aren't the flashiest plays, right? And even like communication things or like intangible things, you're never gonna know unless you're playing on that team. Right. I don't know what Danny does for his team, but it's very hard for me to believe that he's, leading stuff when he's got like 4 veterans on his team that have all almost been to Worlds, right? All of them have been to Worlds. So it's like, okay, he's probably not doing like that many like intangible things or like communication things, and he really gets to focus on his own plays, which can enable him to make these crazy flashy outplays, which he did have a lot of, to be fair. But those crazy flashy outplays are what people are going to remember when they're thinking about who to pick for Rookie of the Split. Yeah. It's not going to be like the really boring, like, this one thing that he does every single game. Who cares about that? Because nobody ever notices it.
Well, and I think part of the challenge too, as in my position, when I'm someone on the outside who's trying to talk about all the different teams and players, it feels really bad to go out and say, hey, I'm really excited about Danny because, hey, first split player, rookie, we all should be excited about him as NA talent, but here are all the things that I think he doesn't do that well and why I would vote for someone else. Like, that doesn't feel good to be going out there and undercutting a rookie player, or, saying things like I've been in a very similar position with some other players who were, new to the league this year and come out and like I was supporting them and pushing for them to get into LCS and, be excited about this guy and he's really good. And then he comes in and suddenly I think the conversation on them goes too far into the positive. I go, well, let's reel it back and be a little more realistic. But that doesn't fly very well, and it doesn't feel good to say you're overpraising a young player. Like, so, how to handle that is very difficult, I think. And I'm sure that, you guys, when you hear comments on your team in all kinds of different directions, to whatever extent you've learned to not look at social media, it's just one of those challenging things about the discourse about all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I was just curious on kind of your experience of that and your expectations of it. Again, I thought you had a great year, and I'm very looking forward to what you achieve in this offseason and into next year. But let's pivot a little bit. Let's turn the corner, start looking a little more to the future. We probably won't dwell too much on kind of what's going to happen the rest of the LCS season here, but I'm curious from you guys, what you think of kind of the last 3 teams remaining. So we've got 100 Thieves playing up against Cloud9 on Saturday, and the winner goes on Sunday to face against Team Liquid. Inero, do you have any expectations on that match of what you think might happen?
Of which one? The 100 Thieves C9?
The overall, yeah, that, and then
okay. Can
either of them beat TL?
I don't. Okay, so I think if anyone's going to beat TL of the two, it would be 100 Thieves.
Yeah.
I think they can maybe like brute force their way through. I still think TL wins the whole thing. Obviously, last time they played was a close series that easily could have been theirs. So I think they're the ones that are more likely to actually have something happen there and win. But I think 100 Thieves will beat C9 as well. But I think that'll be an interesting matchup to watch. I don't think it'll just be like a freebie for 100 Thieves. But if they get through that, I think it'll make the finals a lot more exciting. I don't think C9 versus TL will be a great one, honestly.
How much of it do you think is like Team Liquid having solved Cloud9? Because that was kind of my perspective. Is like, hey, here are the things about the way Cloud9 play, and we've got the right tools to attack that certain thing.
I don't know if it was them just having it like solved. I think they definitely found a good strat versus them. Like the whole Ziggs thing, obviously, like the next week, C9 just permaban Ziggs, Syndra. They just got the mages at a bottom to kind of solve it.
Vulcan said that he's the Voldemort of their team now. We don't say his name anymore.
Yeah. But it was just like that. I think if you negate C9's bot lane, or find a way to kind of like shut them down in some way, it becomes a lot harder for them to play the game. I think they play much better when their bot side's enabled. I think even in the TSM series, like that kind of got shown. Even though the like Pantheon game, it only went like 1-1. Those are the games where it looked like TSM actually had control of the game. Because their bot wasn't just able to free run the map, and it felt a lot different once they were able to.
Sure.
So, I mean, as long as they have like a solution around that, I think it can work. Obviously, I don't think C9 is going to fall into that same like trap versus them this time. So it could be a lot different if they do play them. But yeah, I don't know. I still just don't think it would be close. I feel like
bit of a
TL's
burden on the coaches
better.
for finding that adaptation, finding something to adjust.
Yeah, maybe it makes draft hard for them to figure out. Who knows? But I think 100 Thieves could do better versus
So if
TL.
you're going to kind of like rank these three teams, you'd say TL 1, 100 Thieves 2, C9 3, more or less.
Yeah, that's how I expect it.
It's a very oversimplified approach to it. Olive, do you see it the same way, or?
Honestly, I see it quite different.
Ooh.
I think TL probably is going to win, but for me, the really big thing in the TLC9 series was, like, first off, like, the Ziggs was clearly a problem, but I actually thought, like, Jensen just, like, Grand Canyon Perks that series. Like, it was not close, in my opinion, and I think Perks has been playing a lot better recently, especially, like, the last few series. He has, like, weird problems, I would say, where like he dies in really strange ways and dies like a lot for some reason. As well as just C9 being like very volatile, like Blabber being very volatile. Like sometimes things just like explode and like there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of faith, at least in Perks. I do think Jensen's very good as well. But in my opinion, like I think if any team's gonna beat TL, it'd be C9. I'm not super sold on the 100 Thieves strengths. I think C9 has like a better chance of winning because if Perks like outperforms Jensen and they shore up their draft problems, like I feel like that series looks very different. I also feel like Fudge has been performing like really well and is probably like a way better matchup in Alfari than someday is going to be. So I feel like they're like the team that might win. But I'm not sure I would actually predict them. I still feel like it's a bit of a long shot to say C9 is going to win, but I would imagine they would probably win before. I would think they were going to win before 100 Thieves is going to win.
Interesting.
You're just wrong, Nick. And you're just completely wrong. Your analysis is bad.
This is because I think about mid lane and you think about bot lane.
Yeah.
This is the internal coaching.
Bot lane's really good, and I think the mid lane's really good. It's like, okay, well, first really good.
So speaking of those three mid laners, though, I'm curious from your perspective. What are the experiences playing against? Well, I mean, maybe starting with Abot as the player who came into the league most recently. Is there like a real difference in the experience playing against each of those three?
Yeah, I think so. I think Abadage, like when he first came, it was kind of like culture shock. I'm not sure, but I was really impressed at the beginning. But then I was a lot less impressed at the end of the year. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it felt like he was playing like really well on like a lot of things at the beginning of the year, even going into summer. But I'm not sure why, but it seemed like that was starting to taper off, and he wasn't like his shambles seemed to like not be as like consistently strong. Like he could play all the champs, but not like to the level that he could. It felt like before. But we also didn't scrim 100 Thieves that much at the end, so maybe it was just coincidence when we played them that I didn't think he was playing like super well. But yeah, I don't know. I was really impressed at the beginning of the year, at least. For Jensen, I feel like Jensen's playing like the same that he always does, but at least near the end of the split, he's giving me like confidence that he's gonna actually like execute on his strategy of just like win lane really hard. I think he does like play the roaming style as well, but I think where Jensen really excels is just really punishing laning phase mistakes and getting like a big lead and translating that in some way.
Okay.
And I think that's like the way the mid meta champs work that roam, because Rise isn't like a champ usually that you just like ignore lane like on TF.
Yeah.
It's more like you punish mid and then roam, or like you shove the mid and then go somewhere else. So, and even the Lee Sin that he's playing, like you kind of have to have threat in your lane to be able to move places. So,
Yeah.
I think his lane strengths like fit well, and he's been playing very well. Perks, I was always really surprised whenever I played against Perks and scrims, because I felt like he always played the same on stage and on scrims. Like almost every other player that I play against, like they play differently. And it's always like they play like safer and they don't play as aggressively, but Perks always play the same. And that's like a good thing and a bad thing, because he plays like very aggressively, and in scrims people die a lot more.
Yeah.
So he dies a lot more on stage, right? It's just it's as simple as that. Like he dies in very strange ways, like I mentioned earlier, and it's a good thing when he's not dying, in my opinion, because there are a lot of matchups that you can get away with on stage that you would never get away with in scrims. So that was always what I was really impressed by. Beyond that, I don't really have that much on perks because we didn't play that much.
That's interesting that you say, on the one hand, that because of the way he plays on stage, he dies more often, but also that it impresses you. And I understand. I think I understand exactly what you mean, but I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who will be like, I don't get it. You're saying he dies more and that's bad. And especially when I tie the thread on that back, I'm pretty sure it was the 100 Thieves series, or maybe it was, no, probably the Team Liquid series, where especially in the first 2 games, I think he got ganked a ton and died a lot. It was one of those. And I made a tweet about this after the first 2 games, like, hey, I think his lane is getting camped really hard, and I think actually the timings they're ganking on him are not very efficient, but that's partly why they're working. And C9 just aren't managing to take the trades for that, or kind of the punishes that they should be able to, and that's the problem, not actually perks dying. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or is that just me being off in my own headspace?
No, like that's like kind of exactly right. Like I think this is something that Faker did a really good job of.
Ooh.
And people praised him a lot back in the day, like season 5 and stuff, is his ability to just like sponge pressure and just not die to ganks and stuff like that. I'm not saying like that it's the exact same thing, but the times that Perks like tries to play aggressive, it's not like dumb, It's
Right.
not like he's intentionally being, over aggressive. Like I do think it's what you said, like he is cognizant of the fact that it's kind of a weird time for him to get ganked, and there is game sense that isn't very well translated in stats, that sometimes you can kind of like just tell when you're going to get ganked based on the enemy laner's movement, and when that's like really on point, it feels like really impossible for the opponent. And thankfully that I haven't had that happen to me very many times, where just some guys just mind controls me and knows exactly when I'm asking my jungler for a gank. But if you can like train that skill, or like be in the zone and have that on your mind, then it can be like really frustrating for the enemy mid laner, because it just feels like they can't get ganked and they're always playing safe, and you're calling pressure and it never does anything. So I definitely think like that I think that's pretty accurate.
Well, and I think a big part that makes this different is that fans or analysts or whatever spend most of their time watching the bird's eye view with both teams' perspectives on, right? And so you think, oh, this is an obvious gank timing, and then they get caught by it or something like that, when as a player, that feeling is completely different, right? Because you're seeing only your own team's vision. And even that fundamental shift, and like this is something a pro view is super helpful with, it can change your perspective on good play, bad play quite a bit. And Inero, as a coach, someone who does, I imagine, spend a lot of your time watching kind of the spectator view, how do you handle that kind of difference in trying to understand the player's perspective or experience of it compared to kind of the spectator experience of the player of the sequence?
You just don't watch spectator view.
Fair enough.
It's really bad, I think, to do, and it gives you kind of bad crutches in the game. So I'll watch with like just our team vision on, and I'll press like F every now and then if like I need to like check something, just know like, oh, if we missed like a window on something. But you kind of try and watch in the same way, where you're able to you try and predict what the other team's going to do, what you would like have your team want to do in response, and how you would play out certain situations. Because like as a coach, you should be on the same page with your team of like what you're expecting to happen, and you should be kind of able to predict what they're going to do, and compare those differences. So yeah, I just prefer to not watch with both teams' vision. I find it's fairly useless. Like it's fun to know, like, oh, this could have happened, and when you go back and watch it, like you'll get to see it, but it's not something you should do the whole time, I think.
Is
I,
that
I
something?
also,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I also want to say, I think the amount of decisions that you have to make as a player with like no vision is like weirdly very high. It's something that you don't really think about like in solo queue that often because you're like not on that level where like you have to do that. But in like when you get better and better and like you see better teams play, you'll realize that especially solo laners have to make a lot of like really informed decisions based on like how the map is being played out and just like do things that look very suicidal, but based on like how like you know that enemy team is going to play macro, like are actually safe.
Probabilities,
And
right?
yeah, like this is something that's like very hard. Like I'm still really trying to wrap my head around it because, you know, like a very often common example of this is just you're pushing the enemy tier 2 and you have no vision anywhere on your side. And like you don't know where anyone on their team is, but like you just know that you're not gonna get ganked.
Yeah.
And there are situations where like you just do that and like you just tank it and you know it's good. But it's very hard for people that watch True Sight to like ever even realize that that's what's happening. Even if they're watching the good teams do it every single game, like they won't even realize that that's what's happening. So
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most difficult skills to pick up as a viewer or like an aspiring analyst or a coach or whatever it is understanding, being able to look at a game state and being able to understand this is the, you know, the number one optimal macro sequence or pathing sequence or, you know, map rotation here. And then therefore, what should the other team be doing if they recognize that as well, right? Being able to predict what's going to happen and then see what actually happens and either adjust, say, oh, I was wrong. These teams did this and it worked out better and try to understand that. Or then see if they do something better, something different than you thought and it doesn't work, being able to say, this was the mistake they made because you anticipate. You can't always be reacting analytically, right? So yeah, pretty interesting to hear what you guys think of that as well. But very, very briefly, which of the 3 remaining LCS teams do you think has the best chance at Worlds?
TL.
Yeah, just straight up, you think it's the same as the strength of the teams in general?
Yep. As long as I think like they're good, they don't run into any issues that takes out their roster again. I think they're the best.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yep.
Is this the team that I think is going to go the farthest or the team that I think could win?
Well, and that's a very perceptive question because, of course, if you're the number 1 seed, you assume you'll be in a better group, right? And that all is that. So, you know, you define which way you want to approach it and then answer accordingly.
Well, I think I'll just answer both because I think it's more likely that TL, like on average, is going to get farther than the other 2 teams, but I don't believe that they would ever win. Like, I don't think. I mean, they could, I guess, but I would be very surprised. I think, honestly, I think C9 has a higher chance at winning. Not by much, but I think if any NA team is going to win Worlds this year, it's much more likely to be C9 just because their, in my opinion, ceilings are like higher.
How would you elaborate on that? Like, so what do you mean by C9's ceiling being higher? Is it the individual skill of their players or the style of gameplay that they bring out, or what is it?
I think it's the style. Like, it's not entirely skill because I think TL is also a very skilled team, but I think just the style that TL plays isn't going to like work as well on the world stage. Like, Alphari is not going to dominate every single top lane on Worlds. And I feel like that's like something that TL play very heavily to. And the teams that Alphari won't dominate against are going to also recognize their top laners really good and probably also play the top. So it's going to be like, you know, it's going to be unexplored territory for both teams probably, unless it's China because they have a million good teams. But it's it's going to be unexplored territory, and I don't see TL like being a very good adapting team. But in my opinion, C9 has a very forcing style where like they will do their play, and like you have to like react to it and play it properly. Otherwise, you're gonna get like blown off the map. And I mean, it kind of ties into what we were saying earlier about perks. Like, you know, he plays very volatile, but if it works, it's very good, and that's exactly how you would define Blabber. Fudge, Sven, Vulcan, I think are all just like extremely solid players, and I think just the play style difference like would allow them to go farther or like the farthest in theory. But
Okay.
I think TL probably will do better.
And what about 100 Thieves in that context? What prevents you from putting them in that same conversation?
I think just to me, 100 Thieves feels like not the most like well-rounded team. I feel like they have a lot of holes that will get exploited, most likely.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I guess we'll have to see what actually happens and whether that's the case. And of course, their seeding going in is going to make a huge difference in likelihood of getting out of groups and, you know, who they would get matched up in the quarterfinals if they do and all that kind of stuff. So we'll have to wait and see. But at least Worlds is going to be in Europe now, which is going to be easier to watch for us North Americans. So we'll get excited for it. We'll spend September raising our excitement levels, you know. And see how high we can get them before we are just putting ourselves into a danger zone. But back to your team and the future of what you guys are working towards. Obviously, you know, off-season can bring a lot of different changes. You know, maybe rosters will change, you know, and I'm sure there are conversations at the management level happening around, you know, are we going to stick with this roster? Are we going to make some adjustment? What's that going to be? And I'm curious, Inero, how much you get involved in that kind of stuff from the past and content we've seen and things like that during the off seasons. It seems like you're pretty closely involved in discussions with the management team about here's what we want to do. Here's my input on which players, you know, are on which point in their trajectory and all that. How closely involved are you in that?
And obviously, like management will make the final decisions of things. Like the org has to decide based on money and all that. But you know, I think every team's coach is pretty heavily involved in it, and then to a certain extent, players. I mean, I would hope. It's kind of weird if not, but who knows? Who knows, honestly. But yeah, I'm obviously pretty heavily involved. Then yeah, players to a certain extent. Like last year, it was FBI closer Huhi were the ones big in the conversations about what to do for the next season. And then, yeah, COVID.
Yeah.
COVID was also in the conversation for what to do for the offseason. And they had a big impact.
To a certain extent, you know, obviously it's still relevant. It seems like on the business side of all this kind of stuff, it's not quite as restricting as it was, or maybe that's just wishful thinking. But, you know, do you go into those kinds of off-season plans with like a lot of excitement for the potential of what this could bring, or is it a little bit more painful knowing that there's a chance that some people on the team you might end up moving on and doing different things, or what kind of emotional package do you carry into that?
It's a bit of both. Like I hate any sort of decision that leads to people not being on the team, especially that I like really enjoyed working with. It always just feels bad. But I mean, that's a part of the job, unfortunately, in competition. Like it is what it is. But it is still exciting it's just like a fresh start every year, you know? You're not coming in with like a record, you know? Like we're not coming in like 3-15 into next year and gotta work from that. It's fresh start. Likely gonna have like a couple new faces every year. It seems like every org always has not the same 5 going through.
Yeah.
There's always some sort of fresh start, and even then, if it's not players, it's like, oh, there's new staff, there's new perspectives. It's always exciting. It's always something fun to do.
New jersey designs, you know, whatever else. All of it as a player in this, how do you kind of prepare for an off season? You know, having to have conversations about, you know, maybe between yourself and the team, and you know, hey, here's how I think I fit into your vision, and how all this might work. But always, I'm sure as a player having that uncertainty about what does my future hold, but also about the rest of your team, knowing that, again, most of the time, teams do have some level of change, and you've been working with these teammates for so long. How does it feel to you as a player coming into the offseason and not knowing what's going to be in the future?
It's definitely a little nerve-wracking. I think what I usually do is like during the off season, I just try and like not think about that stuff too much because like worrying about it isn't really going to change anything realistically, right? So it's one of those, you kind of just like acknowledge that it's, something's going to happen most likely. And you just kind of have to like move forward. Like you just focus on yourself really and try and put yourself in the best spot so that when you come back, like you're in your best condition, right? That's like the most important thing as a player. I think there's also like a lot of value in, making sure you're keeping up like playoffs and worlds and all this other stuff. But, from teammates' perspectives and like who's going to be on our team, like I think that stuff's like really, you don't really want to go into that. At least for me, I don't like thinking about that stuff because, it's just awkward. It's just awkward and like it's hard to talk about that stuff because you don't really know all the, things that are involved. So for me, I just focus on myself, make sure that I'm doing my best, and just make sure that I'm communicating with the team.
Yeah, I guess that's all you really can do, and you have to find a way. It's just like with social media commentary or whatever, that kind of stuff. You got to find a way to kind of handle it psychologically, right? Have you been in a position before as a player where you've been asked for input into possible roster scenarios, things like that?
Yeah, I have a few times. Generally, like it happened a lot when I was playing Academy. And then like usually at that point, because I was in Academy, it was like, who do you think is a good X role? And like,
Sure.
I always felt kind of bad because I would never give good answers because I'm usually like really not thinking about who I'm playing against in solo queue, and that's where I would find that out.
Yeah.
But that's like been my experience at least usually with like finding new players and like new roles. But I mean, see how things move forward for me at least.
Yeah. I've been getting into kind of the armchair general manager content and conversations. I haven't covered your team yet to kind of speculate on what the future might hold, but I think there's some very interesting possibilities. And I can say up front that my scenarios will pretty much all start with Ablazeolive being his starting mid laner.
Nice.
Just throw that out there.
Wonderful.
I think very strange things would have to happen from my perspective, but I'll watch the VOD back and see how Inero's face changes as I said that.
Micro expressions.
Overanalyze it.
Oh, this eyebrow twitched. If it was the other eyebrow, it might mean. Looking into the rest of the league, though, and is just kind of a last point on this, what other teams do you look at if you've kind of taken that step back and looked at their circumstances? Which of those teams do you think might have like the most changes or the biggest, most surprising set of movements going into next year? And do you have any guesses on that?
I mean, I think the obvious one is CLG. They're gonna probably change everyone, I think. Outside of that, I don't know. FlyQuest, probably. Okay. Like they're willing to make shifts mid-season, so probably gonna do some more. Then I think whenever you're like the bottom team, you're gonna expect those teams probably gonna change up a lot. So most orgs usually aren't gonna be happy with that or confident going into the next split that something will just magically click for them.
Sure.
Unless they have like a really good academy team under them. So I don't know, maybe FlyQuest puts the whole academy team in. Who knows? But in CLG's case, like they're 10th and 10th, so a little rough on that end. But I don't know, outside of that, I guess TSM would probably be changing stuff. Like I imagine fourth isn't something they're happy with, like not going to Worlds. So I don't know if it's like too surprising. but it wouldn't shock me if they make changes on that since they spent like a good amount, I imagine. But I mean, everyone knows the like sword art thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much they spent on the others, but I imagine it was still like a little expensive. So.
Yeah, I think definitely I could see TSM. I mean, there's an hour-long video on my YouTube if anybody wants to look that up, where I speculated on what TSM might do, and yeah, I don't think they'll ever be happy with the kind of result they had this year, because it's go big or blow it up. Is kind of the vibe you get out of the TSM camp, right? So, Olive, from your perspective, aside from those teams already mentioned, anybody else that you think might have a lot of change?
I mean, the only one I initially thought of is probably Dig.
Yeah.
I think, with the Dardoch thing and the mid lane change halfway through the season, like, I don't think that's what you want. And I don't think that's, like, a change that you make feeling like it's going to be long term. So I feel like they're probably going to make some changes. They might honestly keep the other 3 roles, but I feel like they're definitely going to make some changes. And if I had to throw like just one random one, because I feel like all of the like those are probably the most likely to make changes. If I had to throw a random one that I think is going to make probably a lot of changes is EG, because they got rid of Deathly right from the first split, where they got 5th, 6th, and then they got Danny, who is a huge upgrade, and then they still got 5th, 6th.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure how the players on that team feel, but I would not be surprised if they're not content with, getting 5th, 6th again. I'm not sure to be honest is going to change. Probably the only person I wouldn't change is Danny. He's the only one that I'd be pretty sure is not going to leave, but anyone else could honestly be changed on next year.
So you heard it here. Olive thinks EG should fire Impact.
Yeah. Let's fire everyone. Actually, fire Danny.
There we go. Now we're cooking. Cool. Well, yeah, I think I personally find the off season maybe the most exciting part of the year. So I always get kind of an early start on speculation, and I find that a lot of fun. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with your team. I'm looking forward to seeing kind of what all lines up there, and also the rest of the league. And now let's take a few minutes at the end here to go through a few listener questions. So it's always possible if you follow the Patreon, patreon.com/oracleselixir. I post the guests in advance, a day or two before the show, and you can submit questions there. Or if you're watching live in the Twitch chat, I give an opportunity. So we've got a few questions here, and we'll go through them. We don't have to spend too long on each one because I don't want to keep you guys too long. But a question from Hakei from Ablazeolive. Is there anyone that you come up against often, whether it's maybe on stage or scrims or even solo queue, who just really crushes you frequently and you're always kind of scared when you play against them?
I think probably, like, if I was going to say this year, scared is like maybe an overstatement, but I think this year I played really poorly against Jizuke. I think Nick can attest to this, that I was not playing well against Jizuke, and I was getting really frustrated playing against him. I wasn't like scared because that's just not the mindset you can have when you're playing, but I think just he had a good matchup against me this year, and that's really only 1 year though. Like, that's not like a long-term thing. Sure. I think if I had to do like, overall my entire life, honestly, it would probably have been Bjergsen, because man, he destroyed me for like a year and a half straight. So, it wasn't until like 2019 summer where I actually felt like I wasn't grieving every single time we played against TSM main team. So, he actually destroyed me. He's so good. So I don't know. I don't really know what to say, but yeah, he was so good. I just couldn't win against him. It was so annoying.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that, like Ryze is not a champion that you normally just sacrifice your lane and go roaming with. And I'm like, yeah, but Jizuke, level 3 teleport for top lane dive kind of thing. Like, that guy will sack waves for anything. So, yeah, I can imagine that'd be a little throw off your rhythms. Another question from higherbrow, and this one's for Inero. you've developed a reputation for taking low budget developmental rosters and overperforming with them. Do you prefer that style of building a team, or do you how much do you someday hope to have a big budget and go for a top tier kind of win now kind of a roster?
Well, I think everyone would enjoy the, yeah, you got like $20 million, go buy 5 fakers and just win. It's hard to say like to not enjoy that. Would be nice. Like it just makes your job easier. But I don't know. I enjoy working with like low budget rosters, whatever people want to call it. It's kind of nice to. It feels a lot more impactful sometimes, a lot more fulfilling because you can see a lot more growth. Whenever you work with a team that's like a lot of veterans, usually it's not really a big like teaching thing. For the most part, those guys are usually pretty set in their ways, and they're probably going to do what they're going to do. And it's more so just ego management and getting everyone on the same page with that, and making sure it just doesn't burn down. Like that's at least what I've like noticed when working with teams with big veterans. And I don't know, it's a different challenge. I kind of like taking a group of guys that are really really open-minded to try things and test them out, and come to conclusions together and kind of help teach them along that way, and then also learn from them because you get a lot more perspective from those guys that are a lot more introspective and willing to try things. They can give a lot more opinions on it because there's generally no like ego attached. Usually,
Sure.
You can kind of trust what you're hearing is like the real stuff and not just like, no, I think this is bad because I don't feel like doing it. I don't know. It's fun. It's nice. Yeah. I wouldn't say I'd prefer one or the other really that much because winning is nice. Winning is fun. Having a lot of money is also fun, but both good, just different ways.
Yeah, fair enough. And we'll wrap up with this one from Zero Limits GK. This is probably more targeted at Inero, but is Golden Guardians planning at all to go to Europe or send any of the players to Europe during Worlds for solo queue practice with all the players there, or even maybe some scrim work?
Maybe. We were talking about doing Korea because like going to China would be really hard, and I don't think anyone wants to do like willingly the like 2-week super quarantine they have there.
Yeah.
So we're talking about going to Korea since everything was going to be in China. So maybe to Europe. Who knows? We'll see. It's not decided yet.
Well, and to follow up on that a bit, Olive, have you done those kinds of solo queue boot camps?
No, I've actually never done a boot camp, surprisingly. I've gone to a few like scouting things where I flew to somewhere just to play in like a scouting grounds-esque sort of thing.
Okay.
But it was all in NA. Or it was online. It was one of the two. It's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of coincidental. I mean, it would probably have been last year, to be honest. And then maybe this year. I mean, we'll see. But it's never happened. Well,
possibly you get your chance and you'll come back as a superhero, and we'll have to see what happens.
Oz champ, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Well, we'll wrap it up there. So thank you very much to both of you for joining me on the show today. Ablazeolive, do you have anything that you want to say to the Golden Guardians fans before we sign off, or to fans of you and your stream and things like that?
Thank you, everybody, for supporting me. Thank you for watching or listening to the podcast today. Appreciate you guys so much. And I will turbo Smurf next year. Do not worry.
And what would be a place where they can find you streaming?
You can find me twitch.tv/Ablazeolive. Twitter is @Ablazeolive. Those are my 2 big social medias. So you can follow me, check me out there.
Good stuff. And Inero, for you have any closing words before we wrap up here?
Nothing big. Kind of like Nick said, just thanks to the fans. Appreciate all the support always. It feels nice. Yeah, that's it.
I know that, just going to prompt you a little bit, I know that your GM had a certain shout out that he wanted you to make.
Oh, Adamus. Right. Yeah, Adamus. Yeah, people aren't aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, actually.
They do like I guess is it like the sports psychology, like performance field kind of stuff for us.
Okay.
No, they're really nice. Usually it's kind of hard to find something in that field, but I know the players have enjoyed it. I know, like, I don't know, we were talking about the fact that we lost when we didn't do a meeting before the games with Matt. And then as soon as we did one again, we won. So it was clear that Matt was the solution.
It was funny, actually. It's 3 games in a week, right? And the first day we did a session with Matt. The second day, and we won that first day. The second day, we didn't do a session with Matt, and we lost. And we're like, guys, we have to do a session with Matt tomorrow. We must. Yeah. And then we did a session, and then we won. So
there you go.
Just saying. So next year, I expect 27 Matt sessions, Nick. Just saying.
Okay.
Yep.
Next,
Adamus decides whether we win or not.
Next year, can you let me know in advance which games you're doing sessions for and which ones you aren't? Because I think I need some help turning this around as well.
Got it.
Benefit my predictions just a little. Great. Well, again, thank you guys very much. We'll make sure that links to these things are in the show notes so others can check them out, and to the streams and social media and so on, and to Adamus. And thank you to all of you for listening. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/oracleselixir. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server, where we talk about League of Legends esports, data science, and a lot of other topics. And links for all of those will be in the show notes as well. This has been the TrueSight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhusen. Thanks for listening.